She stepped into the small coffee shop tucked away at the corner, where the morning sun filtered through the tall windows and caught the floating dust like fragments of old memories. She wore a faded army green jacket, wore at the cuffs, its shoulders slightly slouched from time and use. Her gray hair was tied back neatly. No makeup, no pretense. She walked slowly, not because she was weak, but because she no longer needed to rush. Her steps carried the rhythm of someone who'd once known rough roads and long marches under unforgiving skies. But no one in the cafe knew that. All they saw was an old woman. They didn't see the years she had shouldered a rifle, moving under moonlight through hostile ground. They couldn't hear the roar of choppers in her ears or smell the burn of gunpowder that once scorched the ends of her hair. To them, she was just another elderly face, out of place in a world that moves too fast and honors youth above all else. By the window sat a group of young men, laughing loudly, full of energy and ease. Muscles stretched beneath tight athletic shirts, hair styled sharp, coffee cups in hand, as if the world belonged to them. When the woman stopped by the counter to wait for her turn, one of them smirked. He tilted his head toward her and said, just loud enough for the others to hear. Thought this was a coffee shop, not a nursing home. Laughter burst out, careless, juvenile. That kind of laughter that doesn't ask what it's breaking. No one stopped them. A few nearby glanced over and quickly returned to their phones, pretending they hadn't heard. Silence, it seemed, was easier than involvement. She didn't flinch. She didn't respond. Her eyes rested briefly on the young man's face. Calm, unreadable. Not angry. Not wounded. But if you looked closely, if you really paid attention, you might have seen it. She heard him, and she understood more than he knew. Maybe he thought he was being funny. Maybe he'd never seen an old woman walk into a cafe in a military coat. Maybe he'd never stood in front of someone who had watched her friends die, still clutching a flag in their final breath. And maybe in that moment, he didn't realize he had just stepped over the thin line between humor and disrespect. She simply turned her gaze away. She had no need to defend herself. Those who have lived enough rarely feel the need to speak much. But in that silence, something began to stir. Softly, like the distant echo of an old cadence song. Not yet clear, but enough to make someone begin to wonder, who is she? She turned slowly, her eyes steady, her face calm. There was no trace of anger, no sign of insult. Instead, she gave the young man a faint, knowing smile, the kind that carried more history than he could ever imagine. I used to think I was too old to do certain things, she said quietly, her voice low and weathered, like a song sung in a war long past. Until the moment came when I had to. The boys barely heard her. Or maybe they chose not to. One of them chuckled under his breath, then muttered to his friend, just loud enough for others to catch it. Who does she think she is, anyway? Some kind of war hero. The laughter returned, but now it was tinged with discomfort, forced, unsure. Maybe it was her voice. Maybe it was the way she looked at them, not with contempt, but with something deeper, like pity or memory. She said nothing more, just turned back to the counter, where her small, veined hand reached for a plain black coffee. No sugar, no cream. Her fingers trembled slightly as she gripped the cup, but her eyes never did. They remained sharp, observant, like a soldier scanning the horizon out of habit. As she turned to leave, the sun broke through morning clouds and streamed to the cafe windows. And then it happened. A soft glint of gold caught the light, flashing just beneath her coat lapel. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't meant to be. But the way the light hit it made every detail suddenly visible. A medal, old but unmistakable. Not just any medal. It was the Medal of Honor. A young man, tall in fatigues, maybe home on leave, stood in line behind her. The moment he saw it, he froze. His cup slipped from his fingers, hitting the floor with a dull thud. He stepped forward, his voice shaking slightly. "Ma'am, is that the Medal of Honor?" The room went silent. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Phones were lowered. Even the boys who'd been laughing now sat upright, their faces pale. She paused, turning her head slightly, offering him a gentle nod. "It is," she said softly, "but I wear for them." She didn't need to explain who them was. The young soldier understood. The café understood. Those who serve rarely speak of it. And those who carry the weight of that medal, well, they don't wear for glory. They wear for the ones who didn't come back. The young man stood at attention, not out of habit, but out of respect. Real, sudden, humbling respect. Others in the café began to realize what they were witnessing. This wasn't just an old woman. She wasn't just someone's grandma. She was a living part of their nation's history. One of the boys, the one who had mocked her earlier, stood up slowly. His face had lost its smirk. He approached her, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't know." She looked at him with the gentleness of someone who had seen too many boys like him, eager, loud, unaware. "Knowing now is what matters," she replied. And then she turned, metal catching the light, once more as she stepped out into the morning. No one laughed after that. No one forgot her either. The café fell silent, the way a chapel does when someone enters carrying grief on their shoulders. Conversations died mid-sentence. Spoons paused in midair, and the background music seemed to fade into something distant and irrelevant. All eyes were now drawn to her, not out of curiosity, but from something they hadn't expected to feel that morning: respect. The group of young men turned slowly in their seats, confusion settling over their once smirking faces. One of them blinked, struggling to make sense of what he'd just heard. "What did he say?" he whispered. The young soldier who had stepped forward didn't take his eyes off her. His voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried weight, so much weight that it pressed down on the room. "Medal of Honor," he said. You could hear the breath catch in several throats at once. A name not thrown around lightly. A distinction so rare. Most people go their entire lives without ever seeing one in person, let alone worn on the chest of someone standing quietly in line for coffee. She smiled gently at the soldier, then gave the smallest of nods. "It is," she said, "but I don't wear it for myself. I wear it for my brothers. I'm just holding it for them." Her voice trembled slightly on that last line, not from weakness, but from the weight of memory. The kind of memory that doesn't fade with time, that doesn't soften around the edges. It stays sharp, clear, etched in the mind like names carved into granite. One of the boys, perhaps the loudest among them, stood up slowly. Gone was the swagger, the easy laughter. He approached her cautiously, shoulders slightly hunched, like someone approaching a truth they're not sure they're worthy of hearing. I'm sorry, ma'am," he said, voice unsure. "I didn't know." She turned toward him, her expression soft. She had seen boys like him before. Young, proud, careless, not out of cruelty, but out of not knowing any better. Her hand reached up and rested on his shoulder, gentle and steady. "Knowing now is enough," she said. "That's all I ever hoped for, that young people like you would understand." Another boy, still seated, spoke up without looking at her. His voice was quiet, almost reverent. "I've never seen a Medal of Honor before, not in real life." She turned slightly, her gaze falling briefly to the medal pinned against her old coat. "It's not meant to be seen," she replied. "It's meant to remind." That line hung in the air like incense, slow burning, heavy, unforgettable. And with that, she turned and walked toward the door. The sunlight outside had grown stronger now, bathing the entrance in a soft golden hue. As she stepped through it, the metal caught the light one last time, gleaming for just a moment before disappearing into the day. No one moved. No one spoke. It wasn't guilt they felt. It wasn't shame. It was reverence. They had come in that morning expecting nothing more than caffeine and chatter. But what they received was something far greater, an encounter with living history, with sacrifice, with quiet heroism wrapped in age and humility. Someone, maybe the same boy who had laughed at her earlier, spoke in a hushed voice, more to himself than to anyone else. She wasn't too old to serve. She'd been serving her whole life. And though she was gone, her presence remained. It lingered in the quiet, in the way the boys now sat straighter, spoke softer, in the way the coffee no longer tasted the same. Because some stories don't need to be told out loud. They just need to be seen, once, to be remembered forever. If you believe that courage has no age, and that respect is something we should be reminded of every day, Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel to help us spread more inspiring stories like this one. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you won't miss our new stories each week.